Early August 1915, as the summer dragged on, the war stagnated. Both sides ground to a standstill, suffering from the endless shelling, gunfire, death and disease. Billy noticed even Jack's spirits were flagging as he struggled with continuing sickness. He was painfully thin, and Billy worried he had come back to fight too soon, like so many of the men. "Why don't you talk to the medics?" Billy begged him. "I don't reckon you should be on the front line. Look who's talking. You're no Hercules yourself." Chopper scoffed when he overheard his comment. "We all look like the Walking Dead around here." "What are you on about? I'm in great fighting form," Jack said, grinning as he wiped the sweat from his gaunt face. "Though I could murder a cuppa and a batch of mum's scones." At the beginning of August, the men received their orders to prepare for a massive assault. They were to spearhead an attack to seize the summit of Chunuk Bair above the coast. The huge offensive would include assaults by the Australians and mass landings of British troops along the beach to the north of Anzac. On the moonless nights of early August, troopships disgorged thousands of men under the cover of darkness. Meanwhile, Billy and his regiment gathered in the twilight beneath the hills to prepare for a mammoth battle. Each man was given 2 days' rations, a bandolier with 200 rounds of ammunition, jam tin bombs, and a field dressing. "Geez, as if this will help if I get my head blown off," Chopper joked, holding up his small pack of bandages. They were ordered to sew white patches onto the backs of their shirts so their own forces could spot them in the dark and not fire upon them as they advanced. "I hope our boys can see these and don't use us as target practice," Jack said as he tugged on his tattered shirt. Waiting in their bivouacs beneath the hills, they cleaned their rifles and sharpened their bayonets until they glimmered beneath the setting sun. Billy's nerves felt as tense as the barbed wire at the front line. He wanted to charge ahead, screaming out at the top of his lungs. Anything was better than this endless sitting around, waiting for death. In the early evening, they were given a good meal and a ration of rum. "What's this, the last supper?" Chopper muttered, munching on his meal. Each of the units was assigned its tasks. Billy and his squadron were to advance up the valley first and clear the enemy from Destroyer Hill. They were ordered to carry out these initial attacks silently so as not to alert the rest of the Turks. That meant using bayonets only, no shooting. Billy shuddered at the memory of slicing steel. As they slipped silently out into the night, the chaplain shook each man's hand in turn, murmuring, "God bless you, my boy." They moved along the valley, hearing the haunting sound of 500 soldiers of the Maori contingent chanting in prayer from the beach. Billy and his squadron advanced in single file into the darkness along a rough and winding creek bed. Suddenly, machine gun fire spurted from enemy parapets ahead, striking the stones and kicking up the sand at their feet. Forbidden to fire back, they had no choice but to charge straight at the trench, bayonets fixed. Billy sprinted alongside his friend, hearing Jack's rasping breath together with his own heart thudding furiously in his chest. A trooper was shot through the head in front of them, followed quickly by 2 more. Billy stumbled over their bodies, rushing onwards. They were nearly upon the Turks when their commanding officer fell. Lying injured, he yelled to them, "Go on, lads!" They threw themselves at the enemy, shouting and screaming, despite the orders of silence. Billy and Jack dropped down through an opening in the Turkish trench into pitch-black darkness. They rushed along the narrow sap, jabbing their bayonets into the dark, hearing the cries of terrified men. Alongside Billy, Jack fought hand-to-hand with a Turk. Jack shrieked once, his bayonet slashing wildly. The Turk slipped to the trench floor. They cleared the trench and charged on desperately towards Destroyer Hill. Up ahead, the panicked Turks had set fire to the thick scrub. The flames flickered eerily beneath the white beams of searchlights and the bright flashes and roars of shells. It was as if the whole earth had awoken like an angry giant. They scrambled up Destroyer Hill, surprising more Turkish defenders before taking the ridge. As they held the summit, other units moved swiftly past to attack Tabletop, the flat hilltop above. Fierce war cries echoed from the hills as soldiers of the Maori contingent cleared some trenches. Billy and his squadron hid in the scrub below the cliffs of Tabletop to await further orders. Huddling together in the dark, they listened to the furious battle raging above. "You've slashed your arm," Billy said, catching a glimpse of Jack's ragged sleeve in the flash of light from an exploding shell. "You should go back to get that dressed." A trooper lay next to them, shot through the stomach and crying out in agony. He kept asking for morphine pills, but they didn't have any. "Nah, it's just a scratch," Jack said of his own wound as he glanced at the dying man. "I'll be fine." Billy dug out his field dressing and bandaged Jack's bloodied arm. All through the long night, Billy's squadron listened anxiously to the firefight on Tabletop. In the early hours of the morning, they were ordered to move up to support their troops. They scrabbled and clawed their way up the steep cliffs leading to Tabletop. The exhausted men kept slipping and sliding on the clay slopes until they figured out how to use their bayonets to cut small steps in the hillside. Jack struggled to clamber up with his injured arm, and Billy wondered how he'd ever be able to fight once they got there. On the top at last, they found themselves on a scrubby plateau in the direct line of fire from the heights of Chunuk Bair. Overnight, their troops had managed to clear the area and dig in. They'd scraped out ledges to shield themselves from the shrapnel and had taken over some of the Turkish trenches. The sun rose on a cruelly beautiful day. From Tabletop, they looked down on the warring peninsula. Destroyers on the sparkling sea pounded the coast with explosives, causing a pall of black smoke to rise into the blue. To the north, Billy saw great fleets of transport ships, warships and hospital ships bobbing offshore. Thousands of British troops were forming on the beaches like armies of ants. Trails of troops and mules were moving up the narrow, twisting gullies. But Billy noticed many more troops moving back down, bandaged, bloodied and limping. All day and all through the night, Billy and the troopers on Tabletop strengthened their position, digging in deeper under machine gun and sniper fire. Billy sniped back from behind the safety of a jutting ledge, relieved to be using a gun again instead of a bayonet. Jack fired alongside him, battling to hold his rifle steady with his injured arm, his bandage staining red with fresh blood. "You got to go back down and get that checked?" Billy yelled above the racket. "I'm not leaving you guys," Jack yelled back as he continued to fire wildly. It seemed an age before the mounted riflemen had successfully cleared the way for the infantry to advance up the valley to Chunuk Bair. Before dawn on Sunday morning, news filtered down that the Wellington Battalion had reached the crest of Chunuk Bair. At last, Anzac troops were on the summit. Savage fighting roared on through the burning hot day on the heights of Chunuk Bair. "It sounds like our boys are getting massacred," Chopper muttered as they huddled in their stifling trenches on Tabletop, listening to the carnage above. They heard their men were suffering horrific casualties. One of their own units had been almost wiped out. The Turks were pounding the exposed Anzacs with grenades, machine guns and heavy artillery. The Anzacs were holding on desperately, refusing to give up. In the middle of the boiling hot afternoon, Billy's squadron received their orders. They were to move up to the firing line to support their exhausted comrades on the summit. The men fell quiet, knowing it was likely their death sentence. They trudged up a narrow gorge alongside other troops and mules laden with ammunition. They passed streams of stretcher bearers and hundreds of wounded men hobbling back down the hills to dressing stations on the beach. Many more lay dead or dying on the sides of the dusty dirt tracks. There were simply not enough stretcher bearers or medics to cope. The squadron rested briefly in the scrub on either side of the track, eating a quick meal of dry rations. Like Jack, many of the men were still weak from dysentery and illness. The fighting, intense heat, and now lack of water was slowly taking its toll. Billy and Chopper went in search of water, stopping a passing mule train and picking up a kerosene tin full of petrol-tainted water. Billy passed his pannikin of water to Jack, who lay beneath a straggly bush in the thin shade. The bandage around Jack's arm was now black with caked blood. "Thanks, mate," Jack said, sipping the acrid water. He looked up at Billy through weary, bloodshot eyes. "Will you promise me something?" he asked. "Sure, anything," Billy said. "Promise me you'll get home and look after Spirit if anything happens to me," Jack said, reaching out to touch his hand. "You'll ride him across the hills out the back of the farm and have some fun. You've got to promise me. I'd get you to shake on it if I could move this stupid arm." Jack's words frightened Billy more than the sound of the battle ahead. "But mate, nothing's going to happen to you, especially if you get that arm looked at, right now." "Promise me," Jack insisted. "All right, I promise, but we'll be fine. Remember you once told me all of this would be just like pig hunting?" "Yeah, but this time we're the pigs," Jack said grimly. Billy didn't know how to reply. "Don't worry, mate. I promise you I'll look after Spirit," he said. After darkness, they moved out, heading ever upwards, towards the din of battle. Shells shrieked overhead from below and exploded on the crest of Chunuk Bair, joined by bursting bombs and rattling rifle fire. Billy felt too scared to even think about what waited for them on that summit. He marched alongside his mates like a mute machine. They climbed a ridge onto a pitch-black plateau, stumbling across the rough ground. Stray bullets hit some of their troopers, killing them instantly. As they clambered on, they heard wounded men lying in the scrub pleading for help and water. They pressed on towards the front line, which was lit up by spurts of rifle fire and exploding bombs. With each burst of light, they saw countless dead and dying strewn across the torn battlefield like scraps of litter. The Turks lined a crest only some 13 metres away, pouring fire into the front-line trenches at almost point-blank range. Billy's squadron scuttled down into shallow trenches, alongside what was left of the Wellington infantry. The trenches were full of wounded and bloodied men sheltering at the bottom. "Dig down for your lives, boys," an injured soldier rasped at them from his shattered face. Throughout the night they dug down desperately, trying to make the shallow trenches deeper. But the ground was rocky and hard, and all the while the Turks leapt up on the crest to hurl hand grenades at them. They'd placed the bombs inside long socks and used them to propel the bombs further through the air. "I'll clear these out while you keep digging," Jack yelled, scrambling for the grenades as they fell and hurling them back with his good arm. As dawn broke, the Turks attacked with renewed strength. Their grenades rained down, their terrifying cries of "Allah, Allah," ringing out before charge after charge. The exhausted mounted sprang from their shallow holes to countercharge, firing volley after volley into the retreating backs of the Turks. Each time they returned to their trenches, their numbers were thinner. Men dropped next to Billy like flies. The bottom of the trench was so clogged with bodies he couldn't avoid stepping on them. Chopper used one body slung across the parapet as a shield to shoot back at the Turks. With the coming light, the British naval guns started up again, their shells shrieking up from the beach to explode on the battlefield. Charging Turks were flung high into the air along with earth and equipment. But the New Zealand trenches were so close to the enemy lines that many Anzacs were caught up in the shelling as well. They watched helplessly as their own men were hit. They frantically waved yellow and red flags to signal to their allies the mistake. But with horror, they realised the flags couldn't be seen in all the dust and smoke. One after another, the shells landed on the Anzacs in the front line, their own men disappearing in a hail of earth. The battle raged through the fierce heat of the day, the shrieking of shells and the screams of men filling Billy's head. The air was full of pungent fumes, thick choking smoke hung over the broken ground. Billy felt like he'd been fighting for an eternity. "Please God, let it stop," he prayed. Beside him, Chopper's face was streaked with blood and dust, his eyes flaming behind his gun sight. Jack had stripped down to his singlet, his rifle wedged beneath his armpit, his mangled arm hanging uselessly. The earth in the trenches at their feet ran red. They fought on, hoping and praying they'd be relieved at any moment by fresh troops. But no help came. Billy recalled all the British troops he'd seen on the beach and wondered what had happened to them. As Billy and the surviving men fired off round after round, they started to run out of ammunition. They stripped the guns and ammo from their own dead and wounded, but still they were running dangerously low. "I'm no use here with this blasted arm," Jack yelled, handing Billy his rifle. "I'm going over the top to grab Abdul's guns and ammo before we run out." He indicated the rows of well-armed dead Turks lying in front of their trench. Billy yelled out for him to wait while he covered him. But Jack was already on his feet, scrambling over the parapet. A bullet hit Jack in the face. Without a sound, he toppled back into the trench, dead. "Jack! Jack!" Billy screamed. He dropped alongside his mate, turning his shattered face towards him. "He's gone. There's nothing you can do," Chopper yelled, dragging Billy to his feet. "Quick, you got to help me. The blasted Turks are rushing us." Chopper hauled Billy with him over the parapet. Before Billy knew what was happening, he was chasing Turks across the pitted battlefield, his rifle barrel empty, bayonet fixed. Chopper sprinted alongside him, hollering and howling like a madman. A naval shell exploded directly in front of them. The force of the explosion blew Billy off his feet, throwing him like a rag doll through the air. He landed with a thud, taking several seconds to come round. Immediately he scrambled across the ground to where he'd last seen Chopper. Bullets hissed and spat around him, but all he could think about was how he would tell Chopper's little girl that her daddy was dead. He found Chopper sprawled on the ground, knocked unconscious by the blast but still alive. The bullets thudded around them. Billy had to get him to cover before they hit. He grabbed the heavy man and tried to haul him to safety while keeping low. Chopper was like a dead weight in his grasp. In the searing midday heat, the sweat burst out on Billy's brow, trickling into his eyes. He shook his head and kept tugging. He could see some scrubby bushes and a shallow hollow in the ground ahead. It looked like an oasis in a desert. The bullets kicked up the dust all about them as Billy hauled Chopper across the stony, exposed ground. He gasped for breath, wondering if each would be his last. A bullet hit him in the chest, pinging harmlessly off his ammo belt. He looked desperately ahead through the stinking smoke and dust and could make out the hollow only a few feet ahead. "What you doing?" Chopper demanded, regaining consciousness and struggling in Billy's grasp. "Getting you to safety," Billy rasped. "Leave me, you make a run for it, Billy boy." "If that's an order, I'll have to cheerfully disobey," Billy said, repeating Chopper's own words and still tugging. "I always knew you were mighty stupid," Chopper growled. "You gotta get out of here." He tried to push Billy away, but he had no strength left in his battered body. Billy kept on tugging and, with one last mammoth yank, hauled Chopper to the hollow. He tipped him into safety and was about to flip in after him when the bullet struck. Everything went black.